The last hurdle of a decade-long compensation claim battle. 17-year-old Shamsu undergoes a DNA test to prove he's a victim of a failed drug trial by the pharmaceutical company Pfizer that happened 15 years ago in Kano State, Nigeria. 11 children were killed and several more injured when Pfizer tested out a drug called Trovan on 200 children. The drug was supposed to treat a deadly regional outbreak of meningitis. Pfizer agreed to pay $75 million in compensation in 2009, but they introduced DNA testing as part of the process for qualifying for the payment. Back at home, survivors like Shamsu, who was crippled, and their families feel the DNA test is designed to deny them of the compensation money. Many say they've already provided Pfizer with documents proving their children were part of the trial.
In the claimant form we filled, they stated clearly that only when we undergo a DNA test, they will pay the compensation.
Pfizer, which denies all wrongdoing, even though it's agreed to pay out $75 million, says the DNA test is designed to guard against fraudulent claims.
As we're talking, we've collected samples from 547 people, and only 200 people participated in the study. So what do we do?
But many of the victims are poor and illiterate. They don't understand what DNA testing is and fear it's another attempt by Pfizer to make them guinea pigs in a new drug trial. Some victims abandoned their claims when DNA testing was introduced as a condition of receiving payment. Some of the compensation money released by Pfizer has gone into building this $25 million medical research and disease control center. The hope is that one day locals will be able to deal with things like outbreaks of disease and medical epidemics themselves. It may go some way to healing the wounds of Pfizer's experiment and benefit the survivors who are simply too afraid to go for DNA testing. Yvonne Dege, Al Jazeera, Kano State in northern Nigeria.
It is the world's largest pharmaceutical company. And that's why this news last fall sounded like a huge victory for the government and a huge loss for Pfizer.
The largest healthcare fraud settlement in the history of the Department of Justice.
The government was building a case against Pfizer for fraudulently marketing a drug that had raked in hundreds of millions of dollars in profits. A painkiller called Bextra. Pfizer aggressively marketed it for uses and in doses not approved by the FDA. Instead of prescribing, say, ibuprofen at pennies a pill, they prescribed Bextra at nearly $3 a pill for all kinds of unapproved uses.
Sales were very good.
It brought Pfizer nearly $1 billion in profits, and it cost us all, because Medicare, Medicaid, and our private insurance picked up much of the tab. Mike Laux, then a federal prosecutor in Boston, launched an investigation.
If the company is able to push the product for the unapproved indication, then it makes a mockery, if you will, of the FDA approval process.
Even though prosecutors said the illegal conduct was tolerated and encouraged by sales managers across the country, Pfizer escaped the ultimate punishment.
Just as giant banks on Wall Street were considered too big to fail, Pfizer was considered too big to nail. Why? Because a company convicted of major fraud would automatically be kicked out of Medicare and Medicaid. Pfizer would no longer be allowed to bill any federal health programs for any of its products. It would be a corporate death sentence.
If a company like Pfizer is excluded from Medicare and Medicaid, they're out of business.
Lewis Morris, a top lawyer at the Department of Health and Human Services, told us Pfizer's collapse could leave thousands out of work, millions not getting their medications.
We have to ask whether, by excluding the company, are we harming our patients? Are we harming the beneficiaries who need these critical drugs?
Since shutting down Pfizer was unthinkable, Pfizer and the feds cut a deal. And here's how they did it. Pfizer, located here in New York, owns a company named Pharmacia Corporation, which owns another company called Pharmacia and Upjohn LLC, which owns Pharmacia and Upjohn Company LLC, which in turn owns
Pharmacia and Upjohn Company Incorporated. And what does Pharmacia and Upjohn Company Incorporated do? Nothing. It's a shell created to be a legal shield for Pfizer. In other words, if Pfizer was at risk of being convicted, the shell company would take the hit. Think of it as the great-great-grandson of the parent company. Birthday, March 27, 2007. Just in time to plead guilty in a kickback case against a company Pfizer had acquired a few years earlier. With that conviction, Pharmacia and Upjohn Company Incorporated, which had never sold so much as a single pill, was excluded from Medicare. 2 years later, when Pfizer was in trouble with Bextra, Pharmacia and Upjohn Company Incorporated, the shell company, stepped up again and pleaded guilty. It was like having an imaginary friend, an imaginary bad guy, to take the rap. And Pfizer, too big to nail, is still doing business with the federal government.
It is true that if a company is created to take a criminal plea, but it's just a shell, the impact of an exclusion is minimal or non-existent.
Did the punishment fit the crime? Pfizer says yes. It paid nearly $1.2 billion in a criminal fine for Bextra, the largest fine ever. It paid $1 billion more to settle civil suits, although it denies wrongdoing on allegations it illegally promoted 12 other drugs. In all, Pfizer lost the equivalent of 3 months' profit. But even Mike Laux, who spent more than a decade prosecuting some of the largest drug companies in the country, isn't sure that $2 billion is enough to make Big Pharma clean up its act.
I worry that the incentives are so great, the money is so great, that has maybe made it, dealing with us, the Department of Justice, as just a cost of doing business.
So, Drew, what does Pfizer have to say about all this?
Anderson, nothing on camera. After a lot of back and forth, we got a phone conversation with the company's chief compliance officer. He told us, look, Pfizer takes full responsibility for illegally promoting Bextra, and to prevent it from happening again, here's what Pfizer said it's done. It's set up a leading-edge system. It monitors sales reps, tracking prescription sales and proactively looking for signs that its people are illegally promoting these drugs.
So is Pfizer doing this voluntarily?
No, not all voluntary. Pfizer, they had to sign what's called a corporate integrity agreement with the Department of Health and Human Services. Basically, the executives at Pfizer have to sign on the dotted line to say that their company is going to comply with the law.
But, I mean, you look at this thing, and, I mean, if Pfizer is too big to fail, and even the biggest fine in history is just a few months' profit, then what's going to stop it from illegally promoting other drugs?
Critics say, Anderson, nothing. Nothing. They think that this is really, even though it's a big, big fine, you know, what, $2 billion, they say, look, it is a cost of doing business. And until, even the prosecutor, until and unless somebody goes to prison, somebody high up goes to prison, and or the company is banned from selling drugs to Medicare or Medicaid, this activity, like it has in the past with so many other companies, will continue.
Drew, thanks. Keep them honest.
Good Morning America is brought to you by Pfizer.
CBS Health Watch sponsored by Pfizer.
Anderson Cooper 360. Brought to you by Pfizer.
ABC News Nightline. Brought to you by Pfizer.
Making a difference. Brought to you by Pfizer.
CNN Tonight. Brought to you by Pfizer. Early Start. Brought to you by Pfizer. Friday night on Aaron Burnett Out Front. Brought to you by Pfizer.
This Week with George Stephanopoulos is brought to you by Pfizer.
This weather report brought to you by Pfizer.
Today's countdown to the royal wedding is brought to you by Pfizer.
And now a CBS Sports Update brought to you by Pfizer.
Meet the Press Data Download. Brought to you by Pfizer.
This portion of CBS This Morning sponsored by Pfizer.
On how to find the hidden sugars in the American family diet. Sponsored by Pfizer.